So why are we here today? This is definitely the right place to be if you believe in the downtown Eastside community. There's no doubt that we're in a housing crisis. Housing conditions are atrocious. We're constantly losing housing, and homelessness is skyrocketing. The question is, what do we do about it? Should the City of Vancouver's 30-year plan for the downtown Eastside be updated? What is the plan for housing? Are parts of the plan working? What should be changed? Will the changes that the city's proposing help or hurt the community? Last November, the City of Vancouver's council approved a motion called Uplifting the Downtown Eastside and Building Inclusive Communities for All Residents. That motion, there's copies on the back table. If it's a long one, you should take it home. So we're here to talk about that motion today. That's the purpose of this panel. It's also going to be very nerdy because you're going to hear people talking about all these terms, which we're going to go through in a second. So what does the motion say from my point of view? This is just from my point of view, my reading of it. There's a lot in the motion. Basically, what I see is City Council may want to update the 30-year plan for the downtown Eastside. They may want to find ways to speed up the SRO replacement of the hotels. They want to advocate for SRO renovation funds. The city discussed at the meeting last year, one way to achieve this could be increasing the for-profit housing. And they may want to lower the requirement for housing at the welfare shelter rate. And they may want to increase the proportion overall of for-profit housing in order to pay for more low-income housing, more low-income jobs, and more low-income retail, serving retail. And they mentioned something in the motion about taking a regional approach to homelessness. So we have a great panel of community leaders. It's a really honor to see everybody and talk with everybody here today. And we're really fortunate to have Councilor Rebecca Bligh here from the City of Vancouver. Councilor Bligh, I want to thank you for being here. And thank you for the work that you did to help us get SRO vacancy control. It wouldn't have happened without you. Woo. And it's so great to have a city councilor here that can hear what the community has to say in the lead up to the decisions that you're going to be making on behalf of our community in 2025 in regards to this motion. So before we hear from our speakers, we're going to do a little quiz because some of the words when you talk about zoning can be technical. So the first part of the quiz, the first question is, and maybe, oh, why is my slides not going ahead? Oh, there we go. Sorry. Oh, and I forgot to mention, we're live streaming this. So there's people watching it online on Facebook and other social media platforms, which is really exciting. Hey, Ezra, could you come and help with the mic, do the roving mic, if people want to answer these questions? So maybe in a nutshell, what was the local area plan? Can somebody answer that? Maybe Michael. No? I see a hand. Why was it a 30-year plan? Well, does somebody want to answer what the local area plan was first? How do we see oh, good question. So basically, we got together and for about 4 years, we worked on a future, because if you don't plan for the future, if you fail to plan, you can plan to fail. So you have to have some markers for the future. That's a long period of time, that's correct. So the plan was approved by City Council in 2014, and it was developed in partnerships with many organizations, including residents, businesses, and community groups. And Phoenix is here tonight. She was on the community planning table, and we'll talk a bit more about that. So the next question, what is the DEOD? Anybody? There's got to be somebody who knows what it is. Okay, Terry's got it. So maybe we don't need you, Ezra. Downtown East Side Oppenheimer District. The borders are Alexander to Hastings, Heatley down to Maine with an extension down Hastings to Carroll Street at Pigeon Park. It looks like a truck to me. So you can always remember it. It looks like the little red truck. We call it the DEOD. You're going to hear people say that area over and over tonight, DEOD. And it's an important area, and it's been a land bank for us. So the next question is, what is zoning? Anybody want to take a stab at that? Oppenheimer, downtown East Side, Oppenheimer District. Okay, I don't see anybody chomping at the bit to answer the question. Oh, in the back, Erwin.
Zoning is a perhaps colonial tool to regulate land use. So it's a way that the city or governments control and regulate the way land is used in neighborhoods and in areas.
Yeah, the city decides where to build homes, schools, stores, hospitals, industry on a piece of property. The city decides if you can build 1 story or 60 stories to control how many people live on one piece of property. And why is this important? Zoning affects the value of land. Zoning can protect or displace a low-income community. Okay, next question. What does 60-40 mean? This is getting more challenging. Nicole.
It means upper cost of rent and 40% low income in these newer buildings.
Yeah, so in the zoning for the DEOD, there's a 60-40 percentage. And that means, so basically when the city adopted the plan in 2014, they changed the zoning in the DEOD to make it so that private property owners would have to partner with a nonprofit or government to build 60% social housing on every site. The other 40% would be market rate housing. So that's the 60-40. If you hear people say 60-40, we're always saying 60-40, 60-40. That's what it means. 40% market, 60% social housing. What does social housing mean in the downtown east side? Have you ever thought, what is the definition of social housing? This is one of Jean's favorite topics. Does anybody know the definition of social housing in the downtown east side? Here's a map. It kind of gives you a hint.
Definition.
I can.
Definition means kitchen with bed. That's a social housing. That doesn't mean anything for people. Normal people need normal conditions of living to breathe air. That's my own opinion.
Yeah, the conditions are not always good. Being social housing. So basically, in 2014, the city adopted a definition of social housing that included 1/3 of all social housing having to be at the welfare shelter rate, which is now at $500 a month. So this means in the DEOD, if you remember the truck, where it has 60% of all new projects are social housing, need to be social housing, that 1/3 of that needs to be at welfare rate. So it's kind of like 20%. I don't know if you can follow that, of all new buildings need to be at the welfare shelter rate. Did that make sense? That's the hardest part of the quiz. Okay, what does market housing mean? An easy one. Market. Oh, just quickly, what does market housing mean? Oh, there's a guy behind you, Nicole.
Okay, I've been living in this neighborhood since.
No, just answer the question, market housing, but you'll get a
Market
chance to
housing is
talk
something
at the
for those who
end.
can afford it, period.
Yeah, so market housing is housing that's rented or sold to make a profit. And this would mean in the DEOD developers that can currently get profit on 40% of new of their buildings. And the uplifting motion may change that amount to a higher percentage. We don't know yet. So how much social housing was predicted in the plan over the first 10 years of the plan? Anybody want to take a guess? And this is for the whole downtown east side, not just the DEOD. This is good tutorial for everybody. Anybody want to venture a guess? No guesses? Actually, 1,400 social housing units in the first 10 years, really lowballed what the number would be. It was quite surprising. I read the local area plan to find that out. How many people are homeless in the downtown east side? CCAP found, Carnegie Housing Project found how many people have no fixed addresses at the welfare office in the downtown east side. Can you guess what that number is? 3,500? It's 2,200 in the downtown east side, and it's about the same number citywide, estimated by the Carnegie Housing Project.
There are people living in SRO that they're not giving this as rent for permanent housing.
That is true. There's a lot of people. We recently did a research project where we interviewed all of the SRO tenants in the neighborhood, 10% of every building. And I think 16% of them had roommates. So that could be also hidden homeless. How many people live in hotel rooms that need to be replaced? Single room occupancy hotel rooms. Anybody want to venture a guess? Nicole? Yeah, how many single rooms are there in the neighborhood?
Probably about 700.
700, says Nicole. Anybody want to take another guess? 4,000, I hear. It's actually 6,200. 6,200 rooms. And that doesn't include the roommates. There's that 16%. So you just need to understand the scale of what we're dealing with in the downtown east side. Almost done. So we need 8,400 units, and that's if we don't house the people who are homeless outside of the downtown east side. How much would it cost to build what's needed for downtown east side residents at social assistance at the welfare shelter rate? Anybody do some quick math or know how much that would cost? 8,400 units. It's a good number. The answer, $4 billion. A lot. So it costs $500,000 per unit, $500,000 to build one new social housing unit. That's a lot. And I learned this stat from our friends that $4 billion is half of the total wealth of Jimmy Pattison, just to put it in perspective. Okay, so we're going to move on to our speakers in a second here. Let's see what my notes were. Thank you for putting up with the quiz. I hope you learned some things. So I want to introduce our first panelist, Phoenix Winter. Phoenix was one of the co-chair team along with myself, Jean Swanson, Kathy Shimizu, Michael Clegg, and others who might be here in the room who I haven't seen. We were part of the Downtown Eastside local area planning process that created the 30-year plan for the neighborhood. So I'm hoping Phoenix can tell us a little bit about that local area plan. Devon's got the 5-minute, Devon's neighbor has the 5-minute card, and we'll give you a 1-minute warning when it's time to wrap up. We're going to hear 5 minutes from each of the panelists. We're going to do a little bit of wrap up, and then we're going to hear from the audience. So go ahead, Phoenix.
Thank you, everybody, and I'm sorry I'm not standing up, so I hope you can see me as best as you can. My name is Phoenix Winter. I'm Goan, German, and Scottish, and I'm grateful to be on the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And I say that with a great deal of gratitude because I was homeless when I came here, and I've been in Vancouver now for 17 years, and I had planned on staying. I was actually homeless across Canada and ended up here because I couldn't go any further west. And some of my friends would say, yeah, you can't go any further, and so you end up here. But I'm very grateful to be here and to be in this land, in this place. I've been homeless and mentally ill And my friends always say to identify yourself that way because it makes you real. And that's one thing I found about the people that were on the local area planning process. They were real people. And looking at the slides, a lot of them are no longer with us. So may their memories be with us as we do this work going forward. The local area plan, it was pretty unique because we tried to get the city to do a local area plan that listened to the people in the community here, and especially the low-income people, because the downtown east side was and still is majority low-income people, and we thought low-income people should have a voice in what the city does for this neighborhood. And what was happening, there were a lot of developers buying property, driving up property values, and they didn't even live in the neighborhood, so they didn't care what happened to the people. And so we said, look at, like, we need to have a voice in what happens in our community. And now one of the developers, Bob Rennie, actually has property or an office on Pender Street. And I believe there's one architect in the community. And what happened was we were seeing all the developments coming, and it was hard for nonprofit to buy property in the neighborhood. It was hard for BC Housing to buy property in the neighborhood. And for instance, right at across from the cop shop, well, the old cop shop, somebody wanted to put up a market rate apartment tower, and then people were buying SROs, people were getting displaced, and so we got this local area plan. It took about 4 years to go through, and one of the things that was pretty unique is it took a long time, like months, before the city agreed to, we said, we want the local area planning process, we want the committee to be mostly low-income people, because that's the way the neighborhood was. And the city agreed. And then we also said we want to have at least 50% women. And because we wanted to have gender parity, have both sides equal or close to it. And so we got that too. And it was actually something that some of the city staff were really proud of, like Brenda Proskin, who's also passed on, but she was a city staff. And they would go to other cities and mention our terms of reference that we set out this committee and the way it was set up, and they were quite proud of it. So it was pretty momentous, and it wasn't always easy. Like, I managed to be on a committee with another person, and we helped hire the downtown east side planner that was working on this whole project. And we picked somebody, me and my buddy, but the city didn't like the person we picked. So a man named Tom Wanklin, who was from South Africa, but had relatives in Powell River, he became the downtown east side planner. And we got a chance to put him on 6 months probation to see whether we liked him or not. And he always would make comments like, yeah, Phoenix, I had to be careful what I say with you because you influenced my job. So, but one of the things we learned about meeting, like almost, wow, that was quick. Okay, I've got 1 minute left. So I really want to talk about how important the DEOD is, because there are no condos here. There's been 22 buildings that are social housing that have been built here. And one of the things we got out of the lab was that we got, the city made it so difficult for a condo tower to be profitable in the downtown east side that there have been no condo towers built. So we really say that legislation is so important. And it's the DEOD is the only neighborhood in Vancouver that is protected against real estate development by city policy. So this is unique probably in Canada, and Toronto wants to see if they can follow our example, some of the activists. So thank you. Sorry it took so long.
Okay, next is Councillor Rebecca Bligh. Councillor Bligh is a two-term city councillor. She's a member of the ABC political party and the author of the motion that went to council, the uplifting motion. She's also the newly minted president of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, which is a federal lobbying group of leaders from across Canada, which we're really excited about. And like I said, helped us implement the city bylaw to slow the rent increases in the hotels. Councillor Bligh, you can say whatever you like for 5 minutes, but my question was, did I summarize council's potential updates to the plan accurately when I introduced the motion? And if not, can you clarify? and maybe tell us why council's contemplating the need to make these updates.
Sure. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Wendy, and hi, everybody. My name is Councilor Rebecca Bligh, and really happy to be here for this conversation. And I am going to speak for 5 minutes, but maybe not even, because I really feel the opportunity here is to hear from everybody in this room. So the least amount of talking I can do, the better, quite likely. But I think it's important that it's understood where this motion really came from. And one of the things that has been talked about often enough, and Jean and I sat on council together in our first term, was around a needs assessment for supportive and social housing. And I think it's important to state that the definitions of social housing provincially and what they fund are different than the definitions of social housing and supportive housing that the city has laid out in the zoning, which in itself can be quite complicated because what we have zoned for in supportive and social housing units may not fit into the programs that the provincial government has sort of programmed around funding. So we have to figure out what definition we're talking about. We're talking about social housing because it's not the same across the board. And so that makes even the conversation of what we're talking about quite difficult to understand and also to build. I agree with everything you said in the spirit of the motion itself. I can share with you just very quickly personally. I was, my start in life really was when I became a single mom at 21. And it shaped how I saw the world. I needed housing, I needed a job. I got a job, and the job really made the difference to the rest of my life. My daughter is now 24, and my son is 19. And so they too are looking to build a life in our city. Our daughter lives in purpose-built housing. She's a renter. She works as a veterinary technician for a moderate income job, and would actually qualify for the definition of social housing and working full-time. So we have a gap here because if we have somebody, if that's social housing and that's the target audience for that social housing, and we know that the need that we have in our community, and we also call that social housing, we're letting some government off the hook for not actually building what's required in order for people to find housing. That's step one. What came from this motion, it is long, take it home, digest it, is that we need a holistic approach and answer the question, what does it mean to lift up the downtown east side? It's not to sanitize it, it's not to make it something that it's not, it's to recognize that we have an enormous gap in our ability to deliver the housing that is required for this community to be healthy. Not prescriptive, but healthy on its own terms. So the Downtown Eastside Area Plan, all the good work of everybody that worked on that plan is 10 years old. That's actually a long time. So to your point in the back, 30-year plan, 10-year plan. So the goal of this motion is to test some of the assumptions that were made in the Downtown Eastside Area Plan in a 2024 context. And so it's not to be prescriptive or deterministic. It's not to open up the zoning to allow for strata condo development, because purpose-built rental is not strata condo development. Purpose-built rental is very expensive to build and is a required housing for what I described as people who are working full-time jobs in restaurants, in cafes that also need housing and that are part of this community and can be part of this community. But also embedded in that is shelter rate housing, is supportive housing, and a more balanced approach potentially to the kind of housing that we can build in this community that uplifts everybody who lives in this community. So part of that, and you'll hear from folks on this panel, is creating a community where all people of all economic sort of demographics, if you will, can live, work, and shop. If we don't have places where we can buy our goods, work, go to the store, have a coffee with somebody, meet people, create connection. This is not a healthy community. We need to build a community that can provide and meet those needs for folks. So that's the intention. How we get there is what I'm here to hear from the group and the rest of the panelists. And I'll be taking notes, and I'm here for the conversation, however it starts to shape itself. So appreciate, I guess I took the whole 5 minutes, but maybe that was really important just to say, and really appreciate the invitation to be here.
Thank you, Councillor Bligh. Okay, we're over to Kathy Shimizu. Kathy was also a member of the local area planning committee with Phoenix, Jean, myself, Michael, and others. She's a community organizer with Wheat Press, with Powell Street Festival, and organizes the Tenant and Elder Committee for the Downtown Eastside Community Land Trust. Kathy, I was hoping you can update us on more about what we've achieved in the first 10 years in the local area plan, and especially in the DEOD from research and community's point of view, and give us your opinion on whether or not the plan, especially the zoning, should be updated.
Thanks, Wendy, and hi, everybody, and thanks for coming tonight. I'm really honored to be part of this panel, but actually I'm only here because Kuni Kamazaki was supposed to be here and he couldn't make it. Kuni's a prof at in the planning department at UBC, and he and his students, Michelle Young and Dalia Al Husseini, have been doing some really interesting research. So I offered to share for them. And I want to say thanks to Phoenix for sharing the history of the Downtown Eastside local area planning process, and also did want to remember our dear friend Tracy Morrison, who was part of that. So I want to start with this map to give some perspective, because first, of course, this is stolen land of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples that we're discussing. I'm grateful to be on this land. So we do always have to remember that, and need to prioritize Indigenous sovereignty. And as Norm said, the land is our relative. So that's one thing. And the second is the light, I don't know if you can see the color. The light orange area is the whole city of Vancouver, and there's a tiny dark blob there that is the DEOD. So you can see the relative size of the zone we're talking about in the whole city. And third, we know that these issues and challenges faced by the folks in the downtown east side are from decades of not providing enough money to support people's needs, and providing appropriate, stable, affordable housing, and a stable place to live. So there's going to be a need for a lot of solutions. And while I really appreciate Councillor Bligh's emotion and your hard work to uplift the downtown east side, I do want to address a specific concern that many people have about changing the DEOD zoning. And while the motion doesn't say to change it, it does ask staff to report back, and which could result in a change. So, and also I want to note that the DEOD includes Paudugai, the Powell Street neighborhood, where over 8,000 Japanese Canadians lived and worked before their uprooting and incarceration in 1942. And as a descendant of the survivors of that injustice, I hope that the city will work to retain the DEOD as a social justice zone. So Kuni's research will help dispel some common myths. The first myth is that the DEOD zoning bylaw is not working, so it needs to be changed. But in fact, the goal of keeping property values low and slowing gentrification so that governments and nonprofits and community land trusts can buy properties and create more low-income housing is working really well. You can see that the orange line at the bottom is the assessed property values of SROs in the DEOD, and it's much lower than the blue line above, which is the assessed value of SROs in the rest of the DEOD. And you can see there's a bit of a dotted line, the bright or red at the bottom. In 2014, the bylaw came in, and you can see after that, the prices of the SROs in the rest of the downtown east side went very high, and the ones in the DEOD stayed lower. And what Kuni said is that the biggest challenge to getting more affordable housing is the cost of the land. So the zoning is helping us get more affordable housing. The second myth is, the next slide, is because saying that the DEOD zoning bylaw, there's only a few housing projects that have been built in the past 10 years, but that's not true. 22 non-market housing projects that resulted in 2,251 units are either completed or underway, and the rest of the downtown east side, there's 19, but only about half the units, 1,150. So it is actually helping us get more low-income housing. The third myth is the next slide, is that the DEOD zoning encourages only, it results in sort of a ghettoization, as I say. But actually, there's a good social mix in the DEOD already. And even those new 2,251 units, 44% are at shelter rate, 28% at that Hills rate, which is like if you make about the household makes about 40,000 to 107,000 per year, depending on what size apartment, and then 28% at the low end of market. So there's quite a mix already, and people who work in the downtown side need to live here too. So so that's another good thing about the DEOD. And the last myth is that we need to be upzoned and there needs to be condos, and we just want to share this ripple effect of condos that the Carnegie Community Action Project did around Woodwards in 2012. So within a 1 block radius, they got 125 new low-income units, but they lost 404 because the rents in the buildings around went way up and some of the buildings closed. And then they had 902 condos. So in the end, they lost 279 units, and there was quite a bit of gentrification. So so that's a myth that you need condos for the neighborhood. So rather than getting rid of the DEOD zoning, we should build social housing in the big area around it, which is the rest of Vancouver. And the city has this really great plan they started called the Social Housing Initiative. But this would be an even really much better plan is, and which Rebecca kind of mentioned, is the definition of social housing was the same as the downtown east side, so that a third of the units would be at shelter rate, so that low-income people could live all over the city. So I think that keeping the DEOD, because it is working, and adding these new initiatives would be really great. So, thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. And thank you to CUNY and students. So I'm going to introduce Jean Swanson. Jean is with the Carnegie Housing Project and is a former city councilor where she championed with Rebecca, Councilor Bligh, the SRO vacancy control and other issues that benefit low-income people across the city. Jean was also part of the local area plan co-chair team with Phoenix, Kathy, and I, and Michael. Jean, I think, is going to talk about the SRO and homeless situation and the definition of social housing and what needs to happen with the overall zoning issue. Go ahead, Jean.
Thanks, Wendy. Hi, everybody. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about the SRO and homeless situation, zoning, the definition of social housing, and what needs to be done, and try and cram that into 5 minutes. So at the Carnegie Housing Project, we estimate that there's about 4,000 homeless people in Vancouver, people who are experiencing trauma and misery every day on the street. Homeless people have about half the life expectancy as house people. Ending homelessness is an urgent life-saving issue. It's not a la-di-da, oh, we could wait 5 decades to do this issue. We also have over 6,000 mostly decrepit SRO units that need to be replaced or upgraded. So that's over 10,000 housing units we need to build that should rent at about $500 a month, which is what people on welfare, disability, and basic pension can afford. So zoning. The city is thinking if the federal and provincial governments aren't going to pay for enough money for social housing, maybe we can get developers to do it by letting them build condos or very high density rental towers in exchange for a touch of affordability. An example of how this could work is with the 3-tower proposal on East Hastings near Raytown. It calls for 38 and 39-story market rental towers. Current zoning allows for about 10 stories. So in exchange for letting the developer build over 50 extra stories of revenue-generating view apartments, the city would require the developer to contribute to social housing. How much would they contribute? In this case, the developer West Bank told me they would contribute the land and the architect drawings for a 19-story social housing building that could cost over 70 million in total. The land cost is 14 million or 13 million with the architect drawings under 1 million, so 14 total. BC Housing would have to pay the rest. The whole 3-tower project has 924 units, but only 52 is shelter rate. So the developer contribution is only enough to pay for about 3% of the total. If this method is used in the rest of the downtown east side and DEOD, as Kathy said, it would cause land values to escalate so high that social housing providers could no longer afford to buy land in our downtown east side community. The DEOD zoning is working. It has almost doubled the number of social housing units than the last called for. That's not too bad, but at this rate, it'll still take 50 years to build all the housing we need. Instead of driving up the cost of land with condos or expensive rentals, let's try to double or triple the rate of social housing construction every year. How would we do that? The uplifting motion calls 3 times for the city to write letters to the province and feds asking for housing money. Letters are good, but we need a huge campaign to get federal funds for low-income housing. With Councilor Bligh, now the head of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and the FCM is calling for more federal housing funds for folks who are homeless, we have a foot in the door. The city could fund a strong lobby campaign, hire a lobbyist, take community reps to Ottawa like Mike Harcourt did when he was mayor, make a huge campaign to call for more funds, specifically for lower income housing. I know a lot of community folks would support this 100%, not just letter writing. The uplifting motion asks city staff to report on the impact of making the city's social housing definition the same as the provincial one. The province has no affordability requirements. The downtown east side definition says 1/3 has to be at shelter rate, or $500 a month. If the city abandons the downtown east side shelter housing definition, we could end up with more social housing, but low-income folks would be excluded from it. Social housing that most people think is for low-income people could exclude them. So the 3 keys to housing everybody: keep the zoning we have in the DEOD, fiercely lobby the province and the feds especially to get more money for low-income non-market housing, and keep and expand the downtown east side social housing definition.
Thank you, Jean. And now we're going on to Steve Johnson, who is with a group called Community Impact Real Estate. He helped Councillor Bligh with parts of the motion. Steve, could you tell us about tell us your thoughts about getting more for-profit housing and how that can help us get more benefits for the community?
Sure, thanks for that introduction, and thank you everyone for taking time out of your day to be here tonight. This is a really important conversation, and I'm really impressed with the turnout and your engagement with this issue, so thank you for that, it's meaningful. I want to talk about a couple of things, and I think one is to start by recognizing that this community has been the subject of government policy in a really negative way. We can go back since the beginning of the foundation of Vancouver when the land was taken from the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam. We can look at the internment during the 1940s about how our community was depopulated forcibly. We can think about the renovations of Expo 86 when over 600 to 800 units of housing.
Closer to the mic.
Oh, sorry. I'm used to not using a microphone, so apologies. I just want to continue thinking about how policy has had a deliberate impact on this community, from how land was stolen to the internment of Japantown and Japanese residents, to the depopulation of Hogan's Alley and how that land was taken, to the renovations of Expo 86, where we saw over 800 units converted to tourist housing. And those were all policy choices. But policy can also be a tool to bring investment to community, and I think that's where the opportunity lies, is to look at that. In the case of this particular policy, you've heard a lot about housing, and housing is obviously central to making a functional, thriving, and equitable community. Part of what I want to add to that conversation is it's housing first and it's housing and. And by housing and, I mean creating places for people to workshop and socialize that are accessible and affordable to community members. So policy can be a tool to make that happen, and I think the foundations lie within the recommendations coming forward from this motion. When we think about this particular community, we see a crisis in housing affordability and we see a crisis in commercial rent affordability. If you want to open a store, if you're a not-for-profit service provider, a social enterprise, or someone committed to providing affordability in the neighborhood, finding space is increasingly challenging because the rental rates are equal to the residential rental rates, and it's pricing folks out of community. What I really like about this motion is the opportunity to rethink what it means to create affordable space in community for social purpose real estate. So those places where people can workshop and socialize, and bringing the and to housing. We need housing, and we've heard really well from Jean and others about why that's so important. And this motion creates space for the and. How to create spaces for not-for-profits to stay in community, how to create space for affordable goods and service providers to be in community, how do we create low barrier job opportunities, where do we find places for people to socialize? And I think we can use policy to create those spaces within this particular neighborhood. So when I think about everything that's before us, I'm not so sure that I want to be the proponent for market rate housing, but I would like to be a proponent for how development can work through a policy lens to create affordable space for all of the other things that residents in this community need to live, to thrive, to have a full and rewarding life. And that's where I'm hopeful that these recommendations and this particular motion will take us. To be inclusive of all of those other things, all of those other spaces that are required to make a functional and whole community. Thank you.
Michelle, my question was, can you talk about what a community has to watch out for when negotiating for community benefits with the powerful forces of government and big developers?
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you all for inviting me to be here. So I'm going to answer Wendy's question and build a little bit on what Steve was saying about the and. So I also believe the housing is incredible and first. And when people have housing, they also need access to income. So one of the things that the motion does recognize is that low barrier employment. So employment through that allows people, regardless of their background, of their abilities, lots of different things. Traditional, it's not about traditional 9-to-5 jobs. There's lots of other ways to earn income that when we provide more opportunities to have this low barrier employment, it increases people's health and well-being. It creates purpose and connection. It generates money for food. It generates money for different types of housing, daily needs, etc. So in order for that to happen, and where the city can play a big part, and community and developers, is there are places called social enterprises. So businesses, they get contracts, they work like anybody else. They're businesses, but they have a social purpose. So they're there to create more low barrier employment, or to help with employment readiness, or lots of different things. And the money and the profit that they earn actually goes back into that social purpose. It doesn't go into like giving lots and lots of profit to go into the CEO's pocket. Why is that important? And what is the city's role? That in the motion, it asks for staff to look at opportunities to partner with nonprofits, to increase, to make stronger, to support this low barrier employment readiness, etc. And there are ways that we can do this. Again, without this, we can have housing, but we need more. It's housing and. And so what's this look like? The city, through this motion, through other things and companies, can invest in building capacity for social enterprises, creating more of these opportunities. They can buy from social enterprises. There's lots of different ways to do it. But what Wendy's asking is, if you're working with the city or you're working with large developments, there is a city policy called the Community Benefits Agreement. And that policy requires very large developments to hire 10% of people locally, to have 10% social procurement, so to buy from those companies that have more of a social purpose. And that's great. But here's the challenge, especially for the downtown east side. There are lots of companies and businesses that can be considered social purpose. And I won't go into all the definitions, but when we're working with developers, with the city to do this, the things to keep in mind are, not only do we want them to buy from social enterprises, work with these types of organizations and businesses, but there's also an investment piece. Sometimes investing in building capacity in an organization, in a social enterprise, is just as important, because we need to create the steps to get there so that they can hire, let's say, Clean Start or Mission Possible, my organization. Hire people who have barriers, who can do their jobs really, really well. But we're small. It's really hard to work at St. Paul's Hospital on a big, huge development, right? So there are ways that we need to work together, and I would say to the companies and everyone else that open up your contracts. So you're not hiring one business, one corporation to do everything. Maybe you do that, but you're also hiring, creating the space, and I'd say the space specifically in the downtown, in the DEOD area and around, for social enterprises and those in the downtown east side, because that's how you're going to have the income, and you're going to have the money staying in this community with the people who live in the community. So essentially, invest in social enterprises, hire from, break down the contract so there are small enough jobs that people can work from, and don't start with the biggest. So if I want to start working with St. Paul's, then actually the city can help with the relationships, et cetera. So my organization and others can start working on a smaller project first. We build trust, and then we can go to a bigger one and a bigger one, so that we can get to the point where we're working with a large developer. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. And our last panelist is Norm Leach. Norm is the chair of the Aboriginal Front Door Board, the executive director of the Frog Hollow Neighborhood House, and the chair of the Metro Vancouver Aboriginal Executive Council. Norm, you can speak about whatever you like, but I have a question, and it is, can you talk about the communities, the work that you've been doing to create a vision that actually includes the people that are homeless and the people that are living in the hotels?
Okay. Why is the downtown east side always such a problem? Like, why do we always have to have these meetings with that tiny little piece of Vancouver? And it's world famous, right? Snoop Dogg tweets about the downtown east side. Because this is where people end up. People have lived their lives and they end up here. And Indigenous people end up here too. It's like the end of the road. And you got nowhere else to go. And you end up here. And the SROs, that's the last step before homelessness. And those people need a place to live, but it's getting tougher and tougher for them. And that neighborhood, it was bigger before, and it got smaller and smaller and smaller as they pushed everyone into a smaller and smaller area. But Indigenous people, we know that feeling, being pushed onto smaller and smaller pieces of land. And we also know that we didn't write any of those rules, any of the policies, any of the regulations, any of the bylaws. We didn't write any of those rules. Someone else did, because they weren't written in our language. They didn't reflect our definition of what's fair, what's just, or what is justice. They were written to serve someone else so that they could make money and that they would have their property protected, and to have essentially all the poor people end up in a smaller and smaller neighborhood. But that also means that when people end up in a place, that means we got nothing left to lose. And that means we're also survivors. And that the people who live in these neighborhoods, just think about what they've survived in their lives. And many didn't survive, and many don't survive. And we probably die at a faster rate than anybody else in this neighborhood, just like Indigenous people. So we understand the same issues, but we also know in our bones and in our heart and in ourselves that there must be a better way, that this doesn't have to be this way. That if it was up to us here in this neighborhood to set up a set of rules and guidelines that we could live together in this neighborhood, we could do it. Because for the people who live here, you can't do it all by yourself. And they know that. Only with the help of your friends and your neighbors and everyone else helping each other can it be done. But that's not the way the system works. The system was not designed by us or for us. And so it's clear to us that the system is the problem. Now, I don't believe that problems created by these colonized systems can be solved by these colonized systems. So I ask and I encourage everybody to look back into the traditional ways that Indigenous people had and into your traditional ways too that are ancient before colonization happened to your ancestors too, to the ways that people lived and took care of each other and did not reward and worship greed and self-interest and treating people like less than human. That's not how our ancestors survived. That's not how we survived. So if we come back to our common values and what it means to be good human beings living in these lands and ask the people who've lived here the longest, how do you live here in a good way? They would tell you, and we would all learn how to do that better. And I think we could be an example not only for the rest of the city, but for the rest of the country and for the rest of the world on how to live as good human beings responsibly on our grandmother, not a piece of land, but on the grandmother who gave us all life in the first place. So it's a different relationship with land. It's a different relationship with each other, but it has a lot to offer. And the more work that you do in this area, the more healing it is. Learning to work in circle, learning to work with people, learning to talk to each other like human beings face to face, and resolve our differences and come up with solutions together. So that's all we offer. And the land trust and all the activities that are working around the downtown east side are moving in that direction. And that's what works the best for us. And we think it'll work the best for everybody else. So with that, I'll say, Katherine Smith, all my relations.
Thank you so much, Nora. So before we get questions from the audience, Councilor Bligh, do you want to make some responses? Because it's great to have you here. We don't need to put you on the spot, but if you want to respond to anything you heard, that would be great.
So let me start by saying thank you to everybody who spoke so far. Took a lot of notes. Kathy's going to share her slides with me. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to take away from this discussion already. I think our staff are very much aware of some of the pressures and tensions within the DEOD zoning. Norm, to your point, it does get a lot of airtime, the downtown east side, and not for the reasons that it ought to. So what can we do to be part of as was introduced, telling a different story so that people don't tell the story of the downtown east side without permission and on behalf of the folks in the downtown east side. That's a complex solve. That's a complex problem to solve, but one that I think needs this kind of attention that isn't just focused on anti-profit, anti-development, and not changing. I think we need to just recognize that the health of this community needs to continue to be the focus of whatever we do from a policy perspective that includes housing, that includes health services. One of the pieces of the motion is around on-site health services with supportive housing buildings. If folks can't access what they need from a health and wellness, meaning mobile health units, they're having to leave oftentimes where they are in situations that are not safe to go and seek the health services, and they just can't or they don't. And so we know that people need holistic, complex care that goes with housing as well. So this whole idea of housing and, yes, economic development, 100%, people need a place where they can find work on their own terms. So I believe in the income continuum versus this traditional 9-to-5 workplace that doesn't necessarily work for everybody. But we also have to recognize that people have to be well and access the health services that they require in order to be well. So the housing that we're providing right now, we provide, in society, is not checking enough boxes for people to actually be able to thrive in those systems. So I think that's really what the goal is here, is to challenge that bigger conversation. To Jean's point, and Jean will know, and I took note of your actions, fiercely lobby senior governments. Well, no one knows better than you how that's going. So, and how it could go. So I just think that we're stronger if we stand together, because while zoning is something that the city controls, it's really the last lever to pull. Because if the DEOD has created this interesting economic situation where the land values are more affordable than just a block or two away, then it's right for provincial and federal funding to come in and build the housing that's required. Because if they don't, then private development seems like the only other alternative. And I'm not advocating for that, but left unchecked and without any action, and the city doesn't actually have a play in this. We don't have an agenda here other than to help folks who are unhoused, living primarily in the downtown east side, is a fundamental philosophical goal. How we get there, we only have the options that we have, and we are absolutely advocating and know that the provincial and federal governments need to come to the table with meaningful investment in housing. Because I can tell you right now, we're talking about the downtown east side. This problem is growing across the entire country at a rate after COVID that people don't even realize. Very small rural communities that have the dead of winter that we don't know about in Vancouver have some of the fastest growing encampments. So this is not just a Vancouver-centric problem anymore. This is a countrywide and continent-wide in North America and global-wide growing issue. So we have to focus here what we can control, but we just have to recognize that we're actually working together on this challenge. And as soon as we take a position of something working against, then we're no longer working together. So I just really hope that we can see ourselves as coming to the table with solutions, listening to each other and recognizing that there has to be a path forward that enables more of these 10,000 units to be built. But maybe we have to start with 500, maybe we have to start with 1,000 to at least move the needle on finding ourselves in a different place now or in a year or two from now than we are here. And we know with our SRO housing stock right now, it is the most vulnerable housing stock that we have in our city. And we need to continue to, which the motion identifies, that absolutely needs senior government funding to solve that. And it's our most vulnerable stock. We have unprecedented amount of fires happening right now in our SRO buildings. We know that there's a great risk around this housing stock, so that is a program that we are working on right now. Every day, Wendy will attest to figure out ways that we can really bring in this federal and provincial funding to help stabilize. So I really want to hear from the group here, but there's a lot to take away here. And I think the one last thing I'll say is, Gina and I will, I'm sure, agree on this, that we have to figure out what we're going to use as definitions to define housing, because inclusionary zoning uses the definition of social housing. Well, if that definition is different, area to area, government to government, we're letting someone off the hook here. And so we've got to figure that out, that piece out as well. So I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bligh. For your closing comments.